Lieutenant Harris Lang strode through the underbrush with a level of ease that belied his exhaustion. The air was thick with humidity, heavy with the scent of alien vegetation and the faint, sour tang of metallic soil. This planet called Zelron 4 by the Interplanetary Coalition was a dense jungle world teeming with exotic wildlife, many of which the human soldiers stationed here had yet to classify. Yet to Harris it was just another assignment, and his gaze remained alert, watching for any movement in the undergrowth. Beside him, Zek, a soldier from the native Zelronian species, moved with silent grace. Zek's thin, wiry frame and mottled skin helped him blend seamlessly with the environment, his three pale eyes, two on either side and one at the center of his forehead, scanning the path ahead. They'd been patrolling together for weeks, and while their partnership was meant to symbolize interspecies cooperation, Harris sensed Zek's disdain. The Zelronians didn't quite understand human soldiers, with their loud voices, cumbersome armor, and distinct lack of finesse when it came to navigating the dangerous jungle terrain. The mission today was routine, a simple reconnaissance to track local predators and mark any potential threats. The Coalition was particularly concerned about an apex species the humans had dubbed quillbacks due to the rows of long, quill-like spikes lining their backs. They were ferocious, carnivorous creatures that had already taken down several soldiers. Harris couldn't blame Zek for his nervousness. He'd seen the aftermath of a quillback attack and knew just how dangerous they could be. Suddenly, a rustle in the underbrush made both soldiers halt. Zek's head snapped toward the noise, and he let out a low, melodic hiss, a Zelronian signal for caution. Harris raised his weapon and scanned the area, expecting a quillback to lunge at them from the shadows. But what emerged was smaller, almost harmless looking, though that didn't stop Harris from raising an eyebrow. It was a young quillback, its back adorned with a sparse row of spines that hadn't yet hardened. The creature looked up at Harris and Zek with wide silver eyes, its pointed ears twitching with interest rather than fear. "It's a juvenile," Harris said, keeping his voice low as he glanced at his companion. "Guess they start young here." Zek stared, his mandibles twitching in a clear display of disgust and caution. "Lieutenant, step back. Even the young ones are dangerous. They are born hunters." His voice, though smooth, had a note of disdain, as if even talking about the creature was beneath him. But Harris didn't move. Instead, he crouched down, resting his rifle across his knees as he studied the quillback pup. The creature tilted its head and let out a soft growling sound that sounded more curious than hostile. Without fully understanding why, Harris reached out his hand slowly, palm up. Zek's eyes widened, and he let out a soft hiss of alarm. "Lieutenant, no, it is a predator." Harris gave Zek a bemused look. "You know, it kind of reminds me of a dog. Back on Earth, we domesticated creatures just as dangerous." The Zelronian's face twisted in utter shock. A dog. Harris grinned, his hand still extended as the quillback sniffed it cautiously. "They're loyal animals humans keep as companions. They were predators once, but they became our friends." "Unthinkable," Zek muttered, his gaze still fixed on the quillback pup, whose curiosity now seemed to override any sense of wariness. "Our entire world has known these creatures as vicious killers. They are an apex species here. They serve no purpose other than to hunt and kill." The quillback pup sniffed at Harris's gloved hand, then took an experimental nibble, which Harris took as a sort of testing bite. Harris chuckled, glancing at Zek. "See? Harmless." The Zelronian stared, torn between his horror and something resembling fascination. Harris's casual approach to handling an apex predator, even a young one, seemed beyond comprehension. Zek had been raised on tales of how these creatures had nearly wiped out whole settlements, how they hunted in brutal packs, and how even the youngest could outwit their prey. "I don't understand," Zek finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would you make contact with it?" "Like I said, it reminds me of a dog." Harris shrugged, lowering his hand. The pup watched him with bright, intelligent eyes, and he could almost see the beginnings of a connection there, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even trust. He rummaged in one of his pouches and pulled out a ration bar, breaking off a small piece. Holding it out, he waited. To Zek's amazement, the pup sniffed it, then tentatively licked the food. After a hesitant bite, it seemed to decide the ration bar was suitable, nibbling eagerly. Harris couldn't help but smile, and he found himself speaking softly, as if he were talking to a puppy back home. "There you go, little guy. Not so bad, huh?" Zek folded his arms, still eyeing the pup as if it might suddenly lunge. "Lieutenant Lang, this habit of yours is troubling. Surely you know it will grow into a predator capable of immense destruction." Harris shook his head. "Doesn't have to. I mean, if it's raised around us, it might learn differently." Besides, he added with a grin, I'm willing to bet it'd be a great ally if it grows up around humans. The idea was entirely foreign to Zek. He'd never seen a human treat an apex creature with anything other than fear or violent caution. Watching Harris's easy way with the young Quillback made him feel strange, as if witnessing something fundamentally at odds with how his world worked. The pup, having finished the ration, licked its lips and looked up at Harris expectantly, its spines quivering. Harris chuckled, clearly pleased. Look at that. Already looking for more food. The lieutenant pocketed the rest of his ration bar and rose to his feet, glancing down at the pup. To his surprise, it didn't dart back into the shadows but instead padded after him, its spiny tail swaying as it trotted. What are you doing? Zek hissed in disbelief. It's following you. Guess it likes me, Harris said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Simon, let's see how this goes. Maybe it'll learn something useful from us. Zek shook his head, his disbelief evident. But he didn't argue further. There was something compelling, almost endearing, about the scene an alien soldier walking through the jungle with an apex predator pup trailing at his heels. Though Zek was horrified at the concept, he found himself curious enough to follow along, wondering how this strange experiment of Harris's would unfold. As they continued their patrol, Harris kept an eye on the pup. Its small, agile form moved with a kind of energy he found familiar, like a dog's boundless enthusiasm. Every now and then it would dart off to sniff at a plant or chase a small insect, but it always returned to his side, casting a look up at him as if for approval. Zek watched the interaction with increasing bewilderment. Humans are a strange species, he murmured, almost to himself. You trust without reason. Harris shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe we're just willing to give others a chance. After a pause, Zek spoke again, quieter this time. Tell me about these dogs of yours. Harris's face softened. He spoke of the first animals humans had domesticated, how they'd gone from predators to protectors and companions, a bond that transcended generations. He described their loyalty, their intelligence, their ability to sense human emotions. By the end, Zek looked almost contemplative, as if the very idea of a predator as a companion challenged his understanding of the universe. They made it back to camp without incident, the Quillback pup following closely behind. When they entered the perimeter, however, Harris quickly saw that others were less enthused. Sergeant Miller, a grizzled officer who had a knack for survival, took one look at the pup and blanched. Lieutenant Miller said, struggling for words. Do you realize what you've brought in here? Harris glanced down at the Quillback pup, which was wagging its tail in a distinctly canine way. Yeah, a friend. Miller gave him a long, incredulous stare before glancing at Zek, who only shrugged in exasperation. But Harris remained firm, kneeling to give the pup another scratch behind its pointed ears. The creature leaned into his hand, clearly enjoying the attention. Maybe we need to rethink some things, Harris said quietly, as he looked back up at Miller. Not every creature has to be a monster. The sergeant sighed, still skeptical but visibly intrigued by the pup's behavior. Just keep that thing under control, Lieutenant. With a final nod, he walked away, though Harris could tell the story of the human soldier and his predator friend would spread like wildfire through the camp. As the days passed, the Quillback pup grew bolder, its youthful curiosity earning it a place among the soldiers. At first they kept their distance, wary of its spines and powerful jaws, but Harris's easy bond with it slowly changed their perception. Even Zek began to regard the pup with something close to acceptance, though he often shook his head at the strange sight. In time, the pup proved its worth. On one mission, it detected an ambush of Zolronian rebels before the squad did, saving them from certain disaster. The soldiers, previously doubtful, began to appreciate the little creature that Harris had so stubbornly adopted. And as the days turned to weeks, Harris realized something fundamental had shifted not just in the pup, but in everyone who had witnessed it. Humans and aliens alike began to wonder what other bonds could be formed in this universe, what other creatures might find common ground with them if only given the chance. Months passed, and the Quillback pup, now named Rex, had become a fixture in the camp. The creature had grown considerably, its spine sharper, its body muscular, and its instincts keener. Yet its loyalty to Harris never wavered. Rex often followed him on patrols, moving through the jungle with ease and detecting threats long before the human and Zolronian soldiers did. Even the most skeptical soldiers had to admit that Rex was a valuable addition, his keen senses saving lives on multiple occasions. Rex's reputation spread quickly, and soldiers from other units began visiting the camp just to catch a glimpse of the once feared predator walking calmly alongside humans. Zelronians from nearby villages were also drawn by stories of the human-tamed quillback, though many remained skeptical or outright disbelieving. Harris found himself increasingly sought out by scientists and researchers interested in understanding how he'd managed to domesticate Rex. They poked and prodded, running endless tests and behavioral assessments, while Harris observed them with mild amusement. Rex tolerated the attention but was quick to let researchers know when he'd had enough, baring his teeth just enough to make his point. One evening, after another exhausting day of tests, Harris sat alone by the campfire, watching the flames flicker. Rex lay curled up beside him, his spines glinting in the firelight. The creature had become something more than just a pet or an experiment. He was a companion, a partner. Harris hadn't realized how much he'd needed that connection, especially so far from Earth. As he sat in contemplation, Zek approached quietly, settling across from him with a rare look of introspection. The two had grown closer over the months, a friendship forged in the daily challenges of the Zelronian wilderness, and the trust built in the face of adversity. "You humans truly are strange," Zek said, his voice tinged with something Harris couldn't quite place. "I thought I understood your people, but Rex, he complicates everything." Harris chuckled. "Complicates, huh?" Zek inclined his head. "You see, in Zelronian culture, predators like Rex are symbols of death and destruction. They represent forces that cannot be tamed, the chaos of nature itself. To make one into an ally, it's more than unusual. It's unsettling." Harris watched Zek carefully. "Do you still think of Rex as just a dangerous animal?" Zek was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Rex. "No, I see he's different with you. He acts as if he's not just loyal but connected. Like he chose you." He tilted his head, his eyes thoughtful. "That's what I find most unsettling. We don't believe in this kind of bond with nature, not with creatures that would normally see us as prey." Harris scratched Rex behind the ears, and the quillback let out a soft, rumbling growl of contentment. "Maybe you just haven't tried before. Animals like Rex are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. Back on Earth, we learned that it's not just about forcing animals to obey. It's about building a bond, understanding each other." Zek was silent for a long time, the fire casting strange shadows across his face. Finally, he spoke, almost reluctantly. "Perhaps. There is wisdom in your approach. I just find it difficult to trust something so alien to our ways." Harris nodded. "I get it. But maybe this war would be a little easier if we all tried to see past our instincts to distrust each other." At that, Zek's three eyes seemed to soften, and for the first time he offered a genuine, if small, smile. "Perhaps. Though I doubt most of my people would be so open-minded." Harris leaned back, stretching out his legs. "Neither would most of mine." Their quiet conversation was cut short by the sound of hurried footsteps. Sergeant Miller approached, his face tense, a handheld comm device clutched in his hand. "Lieutenant, we've got a situation," he said, his tone grave. Harris stood, his mind already switching into combat mode. "What's going on?" "Recon units picked up signs of a Zelronian rebel ambush near Outpost Delta. They're hitting our supply line hard. We're being deployed to provide reinforcement." Zek stood up, his expression darkening. "The rebels have been getting bolder. They think we've weakened because of these experiments." His gaze flickered to Rex. "Some Zelronians think humans are losing focus, relying on pets instead of real soldiers." Miller shot a wary glance at Rex, then back to Harris. "You bringing him?" "Absolutely," Harris replied firmly. "Rex is more than capable." Without further argument, Miller nodded, though his expression made it clear he had his doubts. The soldiers quickly geared up, and Harris adjusted his armor, making sure Rex was fitted with his own light protective gear, a custom piece he'd rigged himself with a few armored plates and a sensor collar that allowed Rex to pick up subtle vibrations in the air, alerting him to nearby movement. The team moved quickly through the dense jungle, Harris and Rex leading the way. As they approached the ambush site, the distant sounds of gunfire and shouts filtered through the trees. Harris motioned for everyone to slow down, and the soldiers crouched low, moving in stealthily. Rex's ears perked up, and his spines bristled, alerting Harris to something ahead. Zek nodded, his three eyes narrowing as he caught the faintest rustle, a sign of movement nearby. The jungle was thick, the shadows stretching long as the sun began to dip below the horizon. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Harris saw them Zelronian rebels lying in wait, their weapons trained on the path where Coalition supply vehicles would pass. Their ambush was well planned, with heavy artillery positioned to take down anything that crossed into their line of fire. but they hadn't counted on Rex. Harris whispered a command, and Rex sprang forward silently, weaving through the underbrush until he was close to the Zelronian snipers. The rebels, so focused on their target, didn't see him coming until it was too late. With a swift, silent lunge, Rex pounced on the nearest sniper, his powerful jaws clamping down just enough to disarm but not kill. The Zelronian cried out in shock, the sound echoing through the clearing, and in that instant, Harris's team took advantage, moving into position and engaging the rebels in a coordinated strike. The fight was brief but intense. Harris kept a close eye on Rex, who moved with precision, disarming and neutralizing targets with a speed that surprised even him. The Quillback's instincts were tempered by training and a loyalty that made him deadly but controlled, efficient yet merciful. When the last rebel surrendered, the coalition soldiers began securing the site. Harris noticed Zeke watching Rex with an expression he hadn't seen before, a look not of fear or revulsion, but respect. "You know," Zek said as he approached Harris, "I was wrong about him. He's more than a predator. He fights like one of us." Harris scratched Rex behind the ears, pride evident in his smile. "Told you he was a good boy." Zek's face softened. "Perhaps there's more to learn from your people than we thought." In the days following the ambush, news of Rex's actions spread quickly. The Quillback became something of a legend among both humans and Zelronians, a symbol of what could be achieved when different species set aside their prejudices and worked together. Some Zelronian villagers even started bringing young animals to the human camp, curious to see if they too could be trained and raised with the same loyalty and understanding. As for Rex, he took to his newfound role with an easy pride, sticking close to Harris, his instincts sharper, his bond with his human companion deeper. He had become more than a pet, more than a wild creature. They were partners, defenders of a fragile alliance in a galaxy torn by conflict. One evening, as Harris sat by the fire with Zek, Rex curled at his side, a feeling of peace settled over him. He realized that in training Rex, he had not only found an ally but had forged a bridge between two species that once viewed each other with suspicion and fear. Zek's gaze drifted over to Rex, and a small smile touched his lips. "Maybe one day we'll tell stories of this. A human and a Quillback, fighting side by side." Harris chuckled. "I'd like that. And maybe one day Rex won't be the only one. Maybe we can find other ways to work together." The fire crackled between them as the jungle settled into quiet, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Harris allowed himself a glimmer of hope for the war, for the alliance, and for a future where creatures like Rex were no longer feared but embraced. In that moment, surrounded by friends both human and alien, he felt that maybe, just maybe, peace was within reach. Over the next few weeks, Harris felt a new tension hanging over the camp. Rex had earned his place as both a legend and a tactical asset, but his growing fame wasn't without complications. Coalition brass had gotten wind of the Quillback's effectiveness in combat and started asking pointed questions, ones that made Harris uncomfortable. There was talk of capturing and training more Quillbacks, and rumors circulated that research teams might be deployed to study the local wildlife more aggressively. Harris saw it in the soldiers' faces, to a mixture of awe and uncertainty whenever Rex passed through camp. Most of them had accepted the Quillback as Harris's partner, but some still eyed him with wariness, a few with outright suspicion. The fact that Rex had once been a wild predator wasn't something everyone could just forget, and it was clear not everyone was thrilled about the idea of expanding the experiment. One night, as Harris was patrolling the perimeter with Rex, he spotted Zek waiting near the edge of camp. The Zelronian waved him over with a serious expression. "Lieutenant, we need to talk," Zek said quietly, glancing at Rex as if weighing his words carefully. "I've heard troubling news from my people in the villages. They've noticed more coalition research drones patrolling the jungle, and some reports say they're marking locations with high Quillback activity." Harris clenched his jaw, feeling the uncomfortable weight of that news settle in his chest. "The coalition doesn't exactly share all of its plans with me, but I've heard similar things. I think some of them see Rex as a model." Zek's eyes narrowed. "A model? For what?" "Training more Quillbacks for military use," Harris admitted. "I don't like it either. Rex isn't a weapon, he's my partner. But Command sees the value in taming more apex predators." Zek shook his head, his mandibles twitching in anger. "This will not end well. My people see Quillbacks as sacred. They are guardians of the jungle, not beasts to be harnessed." He glanced down at Rex, who met his gaze with a calm intelligence. "Rex is different. He chose this. But if humans start capturing others, forcing them into your service, there will be consequences." Harris took a deep breath, feeling the heaviness of the decision he faced. He knew the Coalition was serious about studying quillbacks, and if he wanted to protect Rex and the other creatures, he'd have to take a stand. But before he could respond, a comm device on his belt crackled to life. Sergeant Miller's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Lieutenant Lang, get back to the command tent. Now. We've got a situation." Harris shot Zek a wary look before nodding. Together, with Rex at their side, they hurried back to camp. In the command tent, a chaotic scene awaited them. Screens flickered with surveillance feeds, showing live drone footage from deep within the jungle. Officers and analysts huddled around monitors, their faces drawn as they watched. On the largest screen, Harris saw a band of Zelronian rebels, their shapes flickering as they moved through dense foliage, just a few clicks from the Coalition's main supply line. Miller spotted Harris and waved him over, his voice low but firm. "We've got trouble, Lieutenant. Intel indicates a large group of rebels mobilizing near the main base. Looks like they're preparing to hit us hard and disrupt our supply chain." Harris watched the screen, catching sight of something else among the rebels, a flash of silver, glinting off the spines of several quillbacks prowling alongside them. They were large, aggressive, and clearly under the rebels' control, though Harris doubted it was the same bond he had with Rex. From the look of things, these quillbacks had been agitated into a frenzy, used as tools of intimidation rather than willing allies. Harris's stomach sank. The rebels had weaponized the quillbacks, and the Coalition had pushed them to it. Now they'd be facing the deadliest predators on the planet, all riled up and ready to kill. Miller turned to him, his face grim. "I need you and Rex on point for this mission, Lieutenant. Your experience with these creatures might make the difference in taking down the enemy." Harris looked down at Rex, who gazed back at him with a quiet understanding. This wasn't just about defending the base or neutralizing the rebels. This was about protecting everything he'd fought for with Rex and proving that the bond they shared wasn't something that could be forced or replicated. "Fine," Harris said, a hard edge in his voice. "But we're doing this carefully. Those quillbacks aren't soldiers, they're animals that got caught in the crossfire of our conflict." Miller just nodded, his mouth pressed into a tight line. "Understood. But I need you to remember that, at the end of the day, this is war. If they attack, we have to defend ourselves." Harris met his gaze, refusing to look away. "I understand. But I'm going to do everything I can to avoid killing them." Zek, who had been listening in silence, stepped forward. "I'll come with you, Harris. I know the rebels. Perhaps I can reason with them, convince them to stand down." Harris nodded, grateful for the offer. "We'll need all the help we can get." Within the hour, the team was assembled and ready to move out. Harris and Rex led the way, with Zek and a small squad of Coalition soldiers following close behind. As they moved through the dense jungle, Harris kept his hand resting on Rex's side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breaths, grounding himself in the familiarity of his partner's presence. They approached the rebel encampment under the cover of night, the jungle shadows concealing their movements. Harris spotted the Zelronian guards first, their weapons at the ready, watching the jungle with wary eyes. But it wasn't the rebels that worried him most, it was the quillbacks prowling at the edge of the camp, their spines bristling as they sniffed the air, clearly sensing the intruders. Harris signaled to Zek, who nodded and stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. The Zelronian guards hesitated, recognizing one of their own, and allowed him to approach. Zeke spoke in his native language, his voice carrying a tone of authority and reassurance. Harris couldn't make out the words, but he could see the effect they had. The guards relaxed, their grips on their weapons loosening, though they continued to eye the human soldiers with caution. But before Zek could reach the main camp, a sharp bark echoed through the clearing, and a figure emerged, a rebel leader named Marik, his eyes hard and unyielding. Behind him, the quillbacks paced restlessly, their eyes fixed on the intruders. "You bring humans here." Zek Marik's voice was laced with disdain. "You've sold your loyalty to the invaders." Zeke held his ground, his expression calm. "No, Marik. I've come to prevent a bloodbath. This war is tearing our world apart. There's another way." Marik sneered, casting a withering glance at Harris and the soldiers behind him. "The only way is to drive them off our land. They don't belong here, and neither does that." Abomination, his gaze landed on Rex, his expression twisted with revulsion. Harris stepped forward, refusing to be intimidated. "Rex isn't an abomination. He's living proof that our species can work together if we're willing to try." Marik let out a bitter laugh. "Work together? Your kind has poisoned our land, slaughtered our people, and now you claim to tame our sacred creatures for war?" This is no partnership, it's domination. Harris clenched his fists, but he kept his voice steady. Rex chose to be with us. I didn't force him into anything. But what you're doing with these quillbacks, turning them into weapons, that's not a choice. It's cruelty. Marek's face darkened. Cruelty? You speak to me of cruelty when your kind invaded our world? I'll show you cruelty, human. He raised his arm, giving a sharp command, and the quillbacks beside him leapt forward, teeth bared and spines bristling. Harris shouted for his team to fall back, but before he could react, Rex launched himself forward, positioning himself between the oncoming quillbacks and his human friends. The air was thick with tension as Rex let out a fierce growl, his spines raised in a clear display of dominance. To Harris's astonishment, the advancing quillbacks hesitated, their eyes fixed on Rex. It was as if they recognized him not as an enemy, but as one of their own. Rex stepped forward slowly, his posture calm but commanding, his gaze never wavering. The other quillbacks stopped, their aggression visibly faltering. For a moment, the entire camp held its breath. Zek seized the opportunity, stepping forward to address the rebels. See, even the quillbacks understand. This war is wrong. We don't have to keep fighting. We don't have to destroy everything sacred to us. Marek's face twisted in anger, but he was visibly shaken, his resolve faltering. He looked from Zek to Harris, then to the quillbacks, who now stood silently at Rex's side, as if awaiting his command. Harris took a deep breath, hoping his words would reach Marek. I know you've suffered, Marek. I know my people are responsible for a lot of that. But if we keep going like this, we'll destroy everything. Rex isn't just a quillback anymore, he's a bridge. Let's build something together instead of tearing each other apart. For a long moment, Marek was silent, his gaze filled with a mixture of hatred and uncertainty. Finally, he lowered his weapon, signaling to his soldiers to stand down. This isn't over, human, he said coldly, but perhaps you've earned a chance. As Marek and the rebels withdrew, Harris felt a wave of relief wash over him. He looked down at Rex, who met his gaze with a quiet confidence. They had won this round, but Harris knew that the path to peace would be long and treacherous. But as he walked back to camp with Zek and Rex at his side, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. They had taken the first step, and perhaps, just perhaps, the bond he shared with Rex could help heal the rift between their worlds. Harris knew one thing for certain: they were far from done, but with Rex by his side, anything seemed possible. In the days that followed the standoff, tensions in the camp buzzed like a live wire. Though Marek had withdrawn his forces, there was an unspoken understanding that he wouldn't give up the fight so easily. Harris had bought them time, perhaps even opened a path to negotiations, but the animosity remained, and both sides knew it could reignite at any moment. Rex's unexpected role in the confrontation had become the talk of the camp and beyond, but Harris couldn't shake a feeling of unease about how quickly the coalition seemed to latch onto the incident. One evening, as Harris sat with Zek by the perimeter, Sergeant Miller strode up, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant, command wants to see you," he said flatly. Harris glanced at Zek, then stood up, giving Rex a reassuring pat as he followed Miller to the command tent. Inside, Captain Reeves, a no-nonsense coalition officer who had arrived only a few days ago, sat at the head of a table, flanked by several high-ranking officials. Lieutenant Lang, Reeves began, her eyes cold and assessing. "I hear you've been quite the innovator out here," she gestured to Rex, who had followed Harris to his side. "This creature Rex has proven unexpectedly useful. Tell me, do you believe he can be trained to follow commands in a high-stakes combat environment?" Harris felt his hackles rise at the bluntness of her tone, as though Rex were nothing more than a weapon to be wielded. "With respect, Captain, Rex isn't just a creature, he's a sentient, intelligent being, and he's proven his loyalty to us through choice, not coercion. He's not a piece of equipment to be assigned to a mission." Reeves didn't blink. "You misunderstand me, Lieutenant. Rex's intelligence is exactly why he's valuable. The Coalition wants to begin a program to assess the feasibility of quillback partnership across multiple units, both human and Zelronian. Imagine the strategic advantage." Harris clenched his fists, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Rex is one of a kind, Captain. He chose to work with me. I don't think that choice can be replicated, especially not under the pressure you're suggesting. Quillbacks are apex predators. Force them, and you'll have a disaster on your hands." Reeves leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "And yet here you are, standing beside one who obeys you without question. You're telling me this can't be trained?" "I'm telling you it shouldn't be," Harris replied, his tone firm. "Rex isn't just following orders. We have a bond. Forcing other Quillbacks would lead to backlash from the creatures and from the Zelronians. Reeves sighed, her expression one of thinly veiled impatience. Lieutenant, I didn't come all the way out here to debate ethics. The Coalition has already allocated resources to this program, and it's moving forward with or without your approval. You're being reassigned. Harris felt the ground shift beneath him. Reassigned. Effective immediately, Reeves replied. You'll be working directly with the research team on developing protocols for Quillback training. We'll need you to assess behavioral patterns, environmental responses. Your field expertise will be invaluable. And if I refuse, he asked, voice low. Reeves smiled tightly. Then you'll be replaced. Rex will be taken under Coalition custody, and we'll see to it that he's studied accordingly. The threat landed like a punch to the gut. Harris's mind raced. They could separate him from Rex, strip him of his command, turn his partner into nothing more than a test subject. He knew that if he defied them openly, Reeves would have him discharged or worse. He met Reeves's gaze, his expression carefully controlled. Understood, Captain. Good. You'll begin tomorrow, she dismissed him with a curt nod, and Harris left the tent, his mind churning. Outside, Zek was waiting. Harris's face must have betrayed his thoughts, because Zek's expression darkened immediately. They're trying to take Rex, aren't they? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Harris nodded, his jaw clenched. They want me to lead a training program, but it's not just training, it's repurposing. They want to weaponize Quillbacks, and if I don't help, they'll take Rex from me. Zek's mandibles twitched with anger. This is madness. The Coalition doesn't understand what they're dealing with. You've seen it yourself, Quillbacks cannot be forced. They are creatures of instinct and loyalty, but if betrayed, they are more lethal than any weapon. He looked at Rex, who gazed back with calm intelligence, sensing the tension in the air. I know, Harris replied, feeling a rush of helplessness. If they go through with this, the results will be catastrophic. Not just for the humans, but for the Zelronians too. And I won't let them turn Rex into a pawn in this game. Zek's eyes flashed with resolve. Then we must act. Harris considered him carefully. What are you suggesting? There is a place deep within the jungle, an ancient site sacred to my people. It is rumored to be the birthplace of the first Quillbacks, a place where they go to lay their young and to die. No Coalition soldier has set foot there, even the rebels respect its sanctity. If we take Rex there, he would be protected. He would be free. Harris felt a glimmer of hope, but it was quickly shadowed by doubt. You're saying we go rogue? Abandon the Coalition, risk being hunted as deserters? Zek met his gaze unflinchingly. If we stay, they will take everything from us, Rex, your command, my people's trust. If we leave, at least we'll have a chance to preserve something worth fighting for. Harris looked down at Rex, who gazed up at him with quiet loyalty, his silver eyes filled with an unspoken understanding. There was no doubt in Harris's mind that Rex would follow him anywhere, but the stakes of such a choice weighed heavily. Finally, Harris nodded. We leave at dawn. Gather what supplies you can. As Zek moved away to prepare, Harris took a knee beside Rex, rubbing his hand along the Quillback's side. Looks like we're in this together, buddy, just like always. Rex responded with a soft growl of approval, nudging Harris's hand with his head. Harris felt a swell of gratitude and determination. He wouldn't let the Coalition strip Rex of his freedom or his dignity. They were more than just soldier and companion, they were family, and he would fight to protect that bond with everything he had. The dawn was still veiled in mist as Harris, Zek, and Rex slipped out of camp. They moved swiftly, sticking to the dense cover of the jungle, the early morning light filtering through the canopy in fractured beams. Every step carried the risk of detection. The Coalition would notice their absence soon, and the search parties would be relentless. They trekked for hours, cutting through the jungle toward the sacred site Zek had described. Along the way, Rex's instincts guided them, detecting potential threats and allowing them to avoid dangerous wildlife and patrols alike. As the day wore on, Harris found himself relying more on Rex's guidance than any of his own training. Finally, just as dusk began to settle over the forest, they reached their destination. The sacred site lay in a hidden valley, shrouded in lush foliage and ancient stone structures that seemed to grow organically from the earth. Strange carvings decorated the stone's depictions of Quillbacks in various stages of life, from pups to majestic elders with massive, gleaming spines. Harris could feel the reverence in the air, an almost tangible presence that made him hesitate as he stepped forward. Zek placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture of solidarity. This is a place of peace, a place where quillbacks are one with their land. They will accept Rex here, he is one of them. Harris glanced down at Rex, who was examining the stone carvings with an air of recognition. It was as though the quillbacks sensed the significance of the site, felt its power. He padded forward, exploring the ancient sanctuary with a quiet reverence, as if he, too, understood its importance. But their moment of peace was short-lived. A crackle on Harris's comm device shattered the silence. He hadn't used it since they'd left, but now it was lit up with transmissions of voice, urgent and insistent. Lieutenant Lang, this is Captain Reeves. We know where you are. Surrender Rex and return to camp immediately, or face consequences. You're on coalition soil, and you're under direct orders. Harris felt his blood run cold. He hadn't expected them to find him so quickly. He looked at Zek, who met his gaze with a grim determination. There's no going back, Zeke whispered. If they take Rex, everything we fought for will be lost. A rustling in the bushes signaled the arrival of a coalition search team, and Harris's hand went to his weapon instinctively. The soldiers, clad in full armor, emerged, their weapons trained on him and Zek. Lieutenant, one of the soldiers called out, his tone formal but wary. Captain Reeves has ordered your immediate return. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Harris took a deep breath, standing tall. Rex isn't going with you. He's free, and I'm not about to betray that. The soldier's gaze hardened. Then you leave us no choice. In an instant, the clearing erupted in chaos. Zek sprang forward, using his agility to disarm one of the soldiers, while Harris took down another with a precise strike. Rex, his spines bristling, defended them with fierce loyalty, intercepting attacks with a precision born of his deep bond with Harris. Despite their numbers, the coalition soldiers quickly found themselves outmatched by the unity of Harris, Zek, and Rex. The three fought as one, their movements in perfect sync, each protecting the other. Finally, the last soldier fell back, clutching his weapon as he scrambled away. You can't run forever, Lang, he spat. They'll find you. Harris didn't answer, his gaze resolute. As the soldier retreated, he looked down at Rex, feeling the weight of his decision settle over him. They had won this battle, but their struggle for freedom was far from over. As they settled into the sanctuary, Harris knew that he and Rex were on a new path now, a path that would lead them away from the coalition, away from the war, and into a future they would forge on their own terms. And as he watched Rex curl up beside him, he felt the first real spark of hope in a long time. They had each other, they had Zek, and they had a world worth fighting for. Together they would face whatever came next. The quiet that settled over the ancient sanctuary felt like a reprieve, a rare moment of peace. The mist rolled gently across the valley floor, and the carved stones seemed to breathe with the pulse of the jungle, as if this place truly were alive. But Harris, Zek, and Rex knew better than to let their guard down. As they rested, Harris kept his gaze on the jungle's edge, watching for any signs of movement. He knew that even with the coalition soldiers retreating for now, Captain Reeves would not let them vanish so easily. She was too determined and too relentless to give up the chase. Zeke sat beside Harris, his expression thoughtful. I never imagined I'd end up here, facing off against my own kind and the coalition. In some ways I feel I betrayed them. But looking at you, Rex, this place, he motioned toward the ancient stones, it reminds me why I did it. Harris nodded. They don't understand this, any of it. The bond we've built. To them, Rex is still just an asset, a resource to be exploited. But the jungle will always resist such thinking, Zek replied. My people learned that long ago. Those who try to dominate this land inevitably face its wrath. As if sensing the weight of their words, Rex stirred and let out a low rumble. Gazing out into the dark jungle, Harris reached down, giving his loyal companion a reassuring pat. This isn't over. The coalition will be back. Reeves won't stop until she gets what she wants. We must plan for that eventuality, Zeke said, his tone sharp with determination. There are still those among my people who believe in the old ways, who respect the quillbacks in this sanctuary. If we can gain their support, we may be able to create a resistance strong enough to make the coalition reconsider. Harris felt a glimmer of hope at the suggestion. A united force, human and Zilronian, allied in defense of the jungle and its creatures, that was something worth fighting for. He knew it wouldn't be easy. It would require not only strength but also diplomacy, patience, and the kind of trust that had taken him and Rex months to build. Then let's do it, Harris said, meeting Zek's gaze. But we'll need allies, people who believe in what we're trying to do. Are there others among your people who might join us? Zek nodded slowly. There is one who could be a powerful ally. Her name is Mara, She's a leader of one of the most respected Zelronian clans, and she has always valued the balance of life here. If anyone can help us, it's her. Harris considered this, feeling a spark of determination. How far? Zek pointed to the distant mountains. A 2-day journey at least. The path is treacherous, but I know it well. If we're careful, we can avoid coalition patrols. Harris nodded. Then we move at first light. The journey was grueling. The dense jungle gave way to rugged cliffs and narrow, winding paths that tested their endurance and resolve. Rex moved with the agility of a native, darting ahead to scout the terrain before circling back to rejoin them, his presence a constant comfort. Every time Harris felt the weight of the trek wearing on him, he'd look at Rex's calm, watchful eyes and feel his resolve harden. On the second day, as they navigated a particularly steep incline, Zek stopped, holding up a hand. We're close. Mara's people are reclusive and cautious. I should go ahead to ensure they don't see your presence as a threat. Harris nodded. Understood. Rex and I will wait here. With a quick nod, Zek disappeared into the trees. Harris crouched down beside Rex, stroking his quill-covered back, each spine a reminder of the fierce, loyal creature who had chosen to stand by him. They sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the jungle, which had a different rhythm here in the mountains, a harsher, crisper edge, as if the land itself knew of the danger approaching. After what felt like hours, Harris saw movement on the path ahead. Zek reappeared, accompanied by a tall, imposing Zelronian woman who carried herself with the unmistakable authority of a leader. Her skin bore intricate markings, and she wore a cloak woven from the dark fibers of native plants, giving her an air of almost mystical power. She studied Harris and Rex with a mixture of curiosity and caution. This is Mara, Zek introduced. Mara, this is Lieutenant Harris Lang and his companion Rex. Mara regarded them for a long moment, her gaze lingering on Rex. She moved closer, circling the quillback, taking in his calm demeanor and his fierce, intelligent eyes. So this is the creature that humans believe they have tamed, she said, her voice low and considering. Rex isn't tamed, Harris replied firmly. He's here because he chose to be. A flicker of approval crossed Mara's face. Then perhaps there is hope yet. Tell me, Lieutenant, why have you come? Harris took a deep breath. I came because the Coalition wants to turn creatures like Rex into weapons. They don't care about this world, only what they can take from it. Zek told me you might help us protect this sanctuary and maybe more than that. We want to build a resistance, something strong enough to make the Coalition think twice. Mara studied him carefully. And what would you do with this resistance, human? Drive your people off our land? No, Harris replied, his voice steady. But we can make them see that there's more to this place than resources to exploit. I know my people. If we show them there's value here beyond war, if we make it costly enough, they'll reconsider. Mara's eyes softened slightly. She reached out, touching Rex's side with surprising gentleness, and the quillback met her gaze with a quiet intelligence that seemed to communicate his understanding of her intentions. The quillbacks have protected our people for centuries, she murmured. To see one standing beside a human willingly. Perhaps times are changing. She straightened, addressing Harris and Zeke. Very well. I will support your cause. But we must act quickly. The Coalition will not stand idle while we gather strength. Over the next several weeks, Mara, Zeke, and Harris worked tirelessly to rally allies from across the region. Mara's presence was invaluable, her influence far-reaching among the Zelronian clans. Her respect for the jungle and its creatures inspired others, drawing warriors, scouts, and even healers to their cause. Coalition deserters, who had grown disillusioned with the campaign, also began to trickle in, seeking Harris out and offering their skills. They were tired of being forced to carry out orders that felt wrong, and the sight of Harris and Rex had a galvanizing effect, a living testament to what unity could accomplish. As their numbers grew, so did the network of hidden paths and safe zones, until they had established a loose but effective resistance force. But Captain Reeves was not one to be outmaneuvered. Soon enough, reports trickled in of coalition strikes against villages suspected of harboring the resistance. Outposts were fortified, patrols doubled, and supply lines fortified to prevent sabotage. Then one day, a scout from Mara's clan rushed into the camp, breathless and panicked. They've mobilized a strike team, he gasped, led by Reeves herself. They're heading toward the sanctuary, and they're heavily armed. If they reach it, they'll destroy everything. A tense silence fell over the camp as the weight of his words settled. Mara turned to Harris, her expression grim. If they reach the sanctuary, it will be the end of our alliance and likely the end of the Quillbacks as we know them. The coalition will hunt them all down to prevent any future resistance. Harris looked at Rex, feeling a surge of determination. Then we stop them here. We make our stand. With swift precision, the resistance prepared an ambush along the route to the sanctuary. They knew the terrain better than the coalition soldiers, and every warrior was willing to risk their life to protect the jungle and the creatures that called it home. As dawn approached, the coalition strike team appeared, their heavy equipment glinting in the dim light. Reeves marched at the front, her face set in a fierce scowl, determination etched into every line. "Hold your fire until they're in range," Harris whispered, watching the team move through the narrow path, where vines and roots wove a dense tapestry overhead. His pulse quickened as he spotted Reeves in the lead. She was right in his sights, and part of him felt a surge of satisfaction at the thought of confronting her directly. At Harris's signal, the resistance sprang into action. Arrows and bolts rained down from the trees, forcing the coalition soldiers to scatter. Rex leapt into the fray with a ferocious growl, his spines bristling as he engaged the soldiers. Harris fought at his side, every movement in sync, each protecting the other. The battle was fierce and chaotic, with shouts and flashes of light slicing through the misty dawn. The coalition soldiers were well trained, but they were unprepared for the resilience and unity of the resistance. And for every fighter who fell, another rose, determined to defend the jungle to the last breath. In the midst of the chaos, Harris found himself face to face with Captain Reeves. She held her weapon with deadly precision, her gaze unwavering as she looked at him. "It didn't have to come to this, Lang," she said coldly, "but you chose them over us." "I chose what's right," Harris replied, his voice hard. "You see this place as something to conquer. I see it as something worth protecting." Reeves leveled her weapon at him, but before she could fire, Rex lunged, knocking her to the ground. Harris quickly disarmed her, pinning her in place. "It's over, Captain," he said, his voice laced with finality. "Your mission has failed. Call off your troops." Reeves glared up at him, her expression a mix of anger and grudging respect. Slowly she raised her comm, signaling a retreat. As the coalition soldiers withdrew, the resistance let out a collective cheer, but Harris knew this was only the beginning. They had won a battle, but the war for the jungle, for the sanctuary, and for Rex's freedom was far from over. But as he looked at Rex, standing tall and unbowed, he felt hope surge anew. Together they would face whatever came next, fighting side by side for a future they believed in.